Bibles in front of you, and I think it might be on the screens. I can't tell. It is. Here now a reading from God's Word. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt, because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Join me in a prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for this Sunday morning where we can gather together as your children, as brothers and sisters in Christ, to worship you, to learn from what you have to teach us. We ask that your Holy Spirit would meet us now and open our hearts to be changed by what you have to say to us. Open our minds to understand your truth, and to ready us to leave this place more in love with you than when we came, and ready to serve those that you have brought into our lives. Amen. Have you ever walked into a room where there's two people sitting there? You don't know if they've been talking or arguing, but as soon as you walk in, you can sort of feel the tension between them. I know that this has happened to me a few times, and you can usually tell by their body language or the awkward position they're sitting in, or maybe their eyes are kind of bouncing back and forth. When I walk in on a conversation like this, my first instinct is usually to back out of the room slowly and act as if nothing had ever happened. I don't know if that's what you do too, but when I read our passage for today, I don't know if you can pick it up, but there's a little bit of tension going on between Jesus and Peter. It doesn't spell it out for us clearly, but if you know anything about the relationship between these two, it becomes a little bit clearer. And so before we dive into this story, we're actually going to take a step back and look at the relationship between these two. Because really, this story is sort of the sequel to something that had happened earlier. Now, see, Jesus and Peter go way back. They first met when Peter still went by his birth name, Simon. Simon came from the family of fishermen, and like any good Jewish son in his day, he picked up the family trade. But all of that would change when Jesus approached Simon and his brother Andrew and said to them, "Come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people." This was Jesus' unorthodox way of inviting them to learn from him as their rabbi, to work with him, to walk with him, essentially to become part of his family. And Simon, he was kind of an all-in kind of guy, all or nothing. And so he left everything. He left his boat, his nets, his family tradition behind, and followed Jesus. Now, Jesus called 12 disciples in all, but Jesus and Simon always seemed to have this particularly close relationship. After they had all been together for some time, Jesus and his disciples, he asked them who they thought he really was. And Simon just blurted out, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And I can imagine Jesus would be touched by this. His student, his friend, his brother is starting to get the magnitude of what Jesus is all about. And so he blessed Simon, and he gave him a new name, saying, "I tell you that you are now Peter," which means rock. "And on this rock I will build my church." Peter had established himself as Jesus' right-hand man, and he went to pretty extreme measures to be with Jesus. When Peter and all the other disciples were out in a boat at night, and they saw Jesus walking towards them on the water, Peter recklessly jumps out of the boat and starts to walk towards Jesus. It was Peter who swore to Jesus and all the disciples at their Last Supper together that he would rather die than abandon Jesus. And that meal is where the seeds of the tension that we read about today are sown. The story we read about today is sort of the sequel to what happened on that night of Jesus' trial and his execution. In typical Peter fashion, he made a grandiose statement of commitment to Jesus over the dinner table, claiming he would give his life for Jesus. But Jesus gives a somewhat cryptic response, saying, "Really? Will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." Now, I can imagine these words might have hurt Peter, but if anything, I bet they left him more confused. What was Jesus talking about? Knowing Peter, this statement might have made him even more sure of himself. Jesus thinks I'm going to betray him or disown him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. This is me. I would never do that. But as the events of the night went on, we begin to see Peter's confidence fade. Jesus is eventually arrested and brought to trial. And while Peter is following behind at a distance, he stayed outside, waiting in the court in the dark, warming himself by the fire, when one of the servant girls on duty noticed him and asked, "You aren't one of this man's disciples, are you?" Nope, not me. Sorry, must have the wrong guy," Peter responds. A little while later, someone else asked him the same question, and again, he denies it vehemently. And then finally, somebody noticed his accent and said, "Certainly, this fellow was with him. He's a Galilean." And Peter barked back at him, "Man, I don't know what you are talking about." And then, just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. Now, most of us will never experience the kind of dramatic breakdown that Peter went through that night. But there's something about this story that I think we can all resonate with. This isn't just a story of a time Peter messed up or did something wrong. This episode of the gospel is about the time that Peter's entire life fell apart right in front of him. I think he really believed that he was strong enough to follow Jesus wherever he went, even to the cross. His whole life had been built around this idea that he was Jesus' #1 guy, the most committed, the most sold out. If Jesus said jump, Peter would say how high. And now all of that was gone. When the moment came for him to stand up for Jesus, he ran the other way. He had completely disowned his friend, his teacher, and his brother. And now there was no way he could ever look at himself the same way again. His bitter tears are the trademark of someone who no longer knows who they are anymore, and someone who doesn't know where to go from here. How many of us have felt that way before? How many of us have had the floor drop out from underneath us, and everything we thought we knew about ourselves and our place in the world is suddenly taken away? The self-image of a hardworking father and husband who can provide for his family gets shattered when layoffs go around the office. The self-image of the good girl at school, the one with straight A's and is president of the student council, is destroyed when she finds out she's going to be a teen mom. The self-image of a perfect Christian family goes up in smoke when their well-hidden patterns of abuse and alcoholism are revealed to the public. I don't know what has happened to you or what hasn't happened to you, but in moments like these, when everything falls apart, we, much like Peter, feel tremendous shame at being exposed. And shame is one of those gut feelings that can really shape how we see ourselves and the world around us. Neil Plantinga describes shame like this. It's a feeling of distress at our deficiencies, deformities, or absurdities. especially at the uncovering of these things. At the heart of shame lies a painful sense of having been exposed. Our poor, vulnerable self, which is foolish, or guilty, or homely, or stupid, or fat, merely parts of us that are private, yet undraped before the eyes of others, and crucially, before our own eyes. And the result is that we want to flee, to hide, to pull the bedclothes over us. In the worst cases, we want to die. We want the mountains to fall on us and the hills to cover us. In these moments of being undraped, we want to run outside and weep bitterly. So now with all of this in mind, the events of that night, let's return to the story that we read about today, the sequel to the prequel. All of this that we read about today is taking place after Jesus was crucified on Good Friday, after he rose from the dead on Easter morning. And now he's sort of making the rounds, and he's meeting up with his disciples and his other followers. And the disciples, they had just finished the breakfast prepared by Jesus on the beach when Jesus calls Peter to walk with him. Now, have you ever done something wrong and had your mom or dad sit down with you to talk about it? One time, my parents caught me doing something I was not supposed to be doing. And I absolutely dreaded having to talk with them about it. Has that ever happened to you? I can imagine that this kind of dread and anxiety that we feel is really just a much smaller version of the dread and anxiety that Peter must have felt going into this conversation with Jesus during their walk on the beach. Because Peter goes into this conversation knowing exactly what he deserves. You know, if Peter grew up in the neighborhood where I work in Sacramento, I work with teenagers in a low-income community in Sacramento, and I hear this kind of stuff from my high school students all the time, that if you don't back up one of your ride or die homies, one of your best friends, you can expect to get some payback. So why doesn't Jesus do this? Honestly, why doesn't Jesus just tell Peter to get lost? You know, Peter completely turned his back on Jesus when he needed him most. Jesus would be completely justified in giving Peter the exact same treatment. So how is it that Jesus is able to go on this walk with Peter, the man who just owned him, and work on rebuilding their relationship? Jesus is able to forgive Peter because he already took the punishment that Peter deserved on himself. Think about it. What did Peter deserve? He deserved to be cast out, to lose his friends, to have them turn their backs on him, to be cut off from his community. And what did Jesus suffer on the day of his crucifixion? He was cast out. He lost his friends. He was cut off from his community. We even hear him crying out on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The punishment that Peter deserved had already been served by Christ. There's no need to punish again. And that's what grace is. For Peter and for all of us, the punishment that we deserve has already been served by Christ. There isn't any more need for punishment or judgment anymore. The debt has been paid. It's like the song that we sang earlier, grace, dear grace, God's grace. Grace that can pardon and cleanse within. Now this whole scene of Jesus and Peter walking on the beach, because of the grace that Jesus is extending, becomes this beautiful picture of Jesus helping Peter learn to forgive himself. It's a picture of Jesus rebuilding a broken man step by step and walking with him as he tries to figure out who he is all over again. As they walk, Jesus starts things off with a question from way out of left field. "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" This is a strange way to begin a conversation, but when we pause for a minute and look closer, we can see that there's something deeper going on here. I mean, first, we see Jesus is calling him Simon, son of John, which tells us something. He doesn't call him Peter, the rock on whom I will build my church. He calls him by his old name, Simon. Why does he do this? I think he does this to meet with Peter in the rubble of his shattered self-image. The name Peter was too closely associated with the big talker, the confident guy who was all in for Jesus. Well, really, that guy doesn't exist in the same way anymore. So Jesus goes back to where it all began, with Simon, son of John, and he starts the rebuilding process from there. After intentionally calling him by his birth name, Jesus asks him, "Do you love me more than these?" Again, huh? What is Jesus doing? What is he talking about? Here there's some debate about what Jesus is referring to. Is he asking, "Do you love me more than you love the other disciples?" Some scholars think Jesus might have been pointing to the fishing boat, saying, "Do you love me more than your old way of life?" But I think Jesus was asking Peter if he loved him more than the other disciples loved him. And this may seem kind of strange to us. It would be like asking which of your siblings loves your parents the most, or whether you or your spouse loves your children more. It's not something we usually turn into a competition. But when Jesus asked this question to Peter, I can't help but think of something that he said earlier in his life, that whoever has been forgiven much loves much. We're talking about a financial debt here. Who would you love more? Someone who paid off your late fees at the library, or somebody who paid off the mortgage on your house? Who would you love more? Someone who paid your Netflix account for the month, or someone who paid off all of your student loans? When we realize somebody has taken our debt and paid it off, our measure of love and gratitude is going to depend on how big that debt was. So when Jesus is asking Peter, "Do you love me more than these?" I think in some ways he's saying, "Peter, you have known a deeper guilt than these, a deeper debt. But I have paid for that guilt and forgiven you for it. Since you know the true cost of forgiveness at a deeper level, you also love me at a deeper level." And Peter responds, "Yes, you know that I love you." And then Jesus says, "Feed my lambs." Sometimes I wish Jesus would just learn how to have a normal conversation. But really, this is perfect. Because this is how you build up a person who has lost all sense of identity and self-worth. You give them a purpose. Here, Jesus reminds Peter that his purpose has not changed. He is still charged with the pastoral role of shepherding the fledgling church once Jesus leaves. And Jesus really drives the point home here because he repeats this line of questioning 3 times. And there's some beautiful redemption symmetry going on here. We know that Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And here, Jesus is opening the door for him to reaffirm his love and commitment 3 times. And while Peter might be completely doubting himself and his ability to lead the church, don't you think that it's better that Peter has gone through this? I mean, think about it. Would you rather have a pastor who is so perfect and shiny and has never made any mistakes in their life? Or would you rather have a pastor who knows just how broken they are, who knows what it's like to fall apart only to receive grace and a new shot at life with Jesus? Don't you think Peter will be a much better pastor and leader because he's gone through this? Of course he will. Because it takes someone who understands grace to preach grace. It takes someone who knows the depths of Jesus' love and forgiveness to tell the story of God's love and forgiveness. Now, I understand that you guys are in the process of searching for a pastor. And I hope that you do find someone who's as broken as Peter. Somebody who understands how much God has healed them to be your pastor. Somebody who's gone through it. That's the kind of leader that God calls to lead his people. Now, do you know what it's like to receive this forgiveness? Has your life ever fallen apart? And if so, I think you get what's going on here. You can think back to your own period of life where the world seemed to be crashing down around you, and everything that you thought you were fell apart. And you can remember when Jesus met you there, when he began to rebuild you from the ground up. And if your life has never fallen apart, well, I don't want to be rude, but I hope it does at some point. Because really, I don't think we can understand Jesus' true love and purpose for us until our own carefully crafted self-image breaks down and Jesus is able to put us back together in his image. This journey of being broken down built up again is what German theologian Andreas Ebert calls the path of self-knowledge. He says, many avoid the path of self-knowledge because they are afraid of being swallowed up in their own abyss. But Christians have confidence that Christ has lived through all the abysses of human life, and that he goes with us when we dare to engage in sincere confrontation with ourselves. Because God loves us unconditionally, along with our dark side. We don't need to dodge ourselves. In light of this love, the pain of self-knowledge can be at the same time the beginning of our healing. It's stories like this, Jesus reinstating Peter, that remind me that God's church doesn't look like a nice, tidy, well-dressed bunch of people who have everything figured out. It looks like a bunch of Peters, a bunch of people who have gone through brokenness, who've hit rock bottom, and can celebrate because they understand three things perfectly clearly. One, that their lives were this unmanageable mess, which had racked up a tremendous amount of what we might call spiritual debt. Two, that Jesus has fully paid that debt. There's no more need for judgment or punishment. And three, that God has given them a new identity and purpose in his family. And I hope you can see yourself as part of that misfit family. I hope that you can add your own unique story of brokenness and healing, of failure and grace, of being broken down, only to find out who you really are in Christ, to the ongoing story of God's people. Let us pray. God, we ask that you would break us down, so that you can build us back up the way that you want us to. We ask for bravery and confidence as we approach whatever thing it is that you want us to let go of, whatever change it is that you want us to make in our life. And God, we thank you for never, ever, ever giving up on us, for never abandoning us, even though it might be exactly what we deserve, for welcoming us back, for healing us, for rebuilding us, and for filling us with your love and giving us an identity and a purpose in you. We ask that we can go out from here knowing our purpose, knowing how much we've been forgiven and how much we are loved, and that we can share that same forgiveness and love and grace with the world around us, that they might know you